Welcome and hello. Hello, friends and new friends. Good to see you all here at our Happathon in San Francisco. Thank you for coming up on a fogging San Francisco night, which is atypical, I think, although it's supposed to be spring. Not quite yet, though we had a bit of it already, didn't we? So I'm assuming most of you have read about the Happathon project, which is why you're here and drew your attention, yes? Yes, so we're going to share a few more details around the project itself and get into a couple of speakers and have a pretty straightforward workshop here together. Really, as you know, the most interesting thing I think about this is that the quantitative measures of money alone is no longer being viewed as really the right indicators to understand our general well-being and our prosperity and so much more about our lives. For those of you who have known me for a while, you know I've been talking about this concept about the market imbalance, and that we have been focusing too much on the quantitative and not enough on the qualitative, and essentially that's one of the reasons why I'm here, and that drew me to this project, that we could actually start looking at qualitative measures as opposed to stock market measures as a single yardstick for success. And what happens when we shift that intention to look at more of these qualitative indicators? So essentially, the happiness indicators that we're going to be searching for here tonight and discussing together becomes a basis upon which we can use to measure and manage our general well-being. And there's a lot of work that's been going on over the last 30, 40 years even in this field. And of course now with open data, big data, Internet of Things, quantified self, and so many other things that are at our fingertips, we're now able to envision a future where we're able to rely upon these indicators and figure out how we want to live in the new world and how we can help other people live together in this new world and live better off and have a higher quality of life. Thanks also to Pulp PR. Ad hoc is my new thing, so I'm not going to talk about that tonight. But I did want to go ahead and bring Jessica up just to talk a little bit about what she's doing, not only here but also nationally with Pulp PR to do all the public relations on behalf of the Happathon project and what have you. So please, welcome Jessica.
Thanks guys for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this project. John's been very instrumental in his vision and guidance for what he wants for this project and the people that he's brought involved in this, and we've been very excited to see a great kickoff today. The app launched, Forbes covered it, so we're going to get some more coverage and some, you know, we'll start a movement, I think. So we're very honored to be here. We're really excited that everybody's here. So yes. I'll let...
Thank you, Jessica. Also, of course, thanks to NextSpace. We do have some day passes if you're interested in trying out NextSpace or you're looking to check out different co-working spaces. You can get those right here. For those of you who don't know, the bathroom's in the back. But before I go any further, actually, we have one of the resource partners for the Happathon project and also one of the advisory committee members, John Clippinger here. And I just want to bring John up to talk a little bit about how his involvement and the role of his organization and the work he's doing at MIT Media Lab and all around the world. Just
well, I'll keep it very, very short.
Move it a little bit so we can get you on the camera. Thank you. Perfect.
You got it? Got it? I met John Havens a little while ago in New York, and I don't know if you know him, but he has an enormous amount of enthusiasm, so you can't resist that. But we're developing a platform called Open Mustard Seed at MIT and a nonprofit called IDQ, which is the Institute for Data-Driven Design. And the purpose of that is to give people control over their own data. So they can push it into a cloud, they can pull it out, and they can aggregate and create their own networks. It's sort of like next Facebook. You're not captive in Facebook, you can create your own Facebook, and you can share data, do quantified self, you can start running experiments. So this is something we've been doing for the last couple of years. We're doing a release. We have our lead architect is in New York working with John. We have another project that we're initiating on another group on quantified self to provide tools that people can not only create the visualizations, but also share it among a network of folks. And then there's something newly sprung up called the Billion Person Project, which it's just very new, but how to reach 1 billion people, nothing immodest about that, but how to give a sort of ecological awareness, to see your impact of sort of your carbon footprint impact, and how you can change that and share it, develop a global identity. So we do a lot of how do you enroll, create a new kind of identity, and then store your information in the cloud. Glad to talk to people about this. wonderful to be part of this, and look forward to making it really happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate your support for the project and the world. You know, and that's something that we have a chance to do now together, and we're going to be working on together tonight, imagining some new ways we might be able to change the world, and really seeding this Happathon project together. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Hewer. I'm a creative catalyst at Athon, a small consulting firm. You can find me at Chris Hewer on Twitter, which is the main place to find me. I wanted to start off by just kind of give you the main gist of what we're going through tonight. We're doing the welcome now, so that's pretty straightforward. We're going to have actually a quick presentation. I'm going to be channeling John Havens a little bit tonight and running through some slides fairly quickly to give a better overview of his perspective on this, how the project came to be. And then we'll have a chance to hear from Peter Hirschberg. You may have seen some of the work he did with the Smart Cities work over the summer, and also working on the mayoral candidates to bring them together here in San Francisco. Doing a lot with open data, and his company, Reimagine Group, is actually leading thinkers around Internet of Things, quantified self, big data, and all of the topics that are going into the possibility we have here. And then the main focus of tonight that we're going to really try to get to fairly quickly is going to be actually the workshop itself, where you're going to break into groups of about 5 or 6 people and work together on envisioning either a campaign or an app or an idea or business model that will help solve our fictional country of, can you pronounce it, Jessica, Udamania? Anyways, I'll get the pronunciation right when I see it again in front of me. But it's one of those names, and it actually is essentially a Latin word for well-being, or the greatest well-being behind it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have somebody from each group actually present the idea at the end. We're going to capture those presentations on video. We're going to share those widely and hopefully seed the idea inside the minds of some hackers and programmers who can actually make it happen. And ultimately have the ideas we come up with here tonight impact the second goal of the project, which is actually to build an app that will be released 1 year from today that will essentially be a personal as well as a global happiness indicator, which is a really interesting thing. Now, who here has actually gone to happathon.com and done the survey?
No, not done it yet.
Okay, so that's going to be one of the things we're going to ask you to do as you leave here. It's about a 2-week commitment. You can schedule once a day, twice a day, whatever. And the idea is that the data that you source into this survey over the course of the next 2 weeks will actually inform a self-learning algorithm that will make the application grow smarter and smarter over time. So ultimately, in the next release that we get out after we collect not only data from this initial phase and over the course of the next year and a couple other touch points throughout the year, but once the app is launched next year and we get all that other data that gets opted in and shared, it'll continue to get smarter and smarter, with the ultimate goal of actually providing people pathways and guidance on how to find greater happiness in their lives. And so that's a pretty inspiring sort of mission, and that's the sort of opportunity that we have here in front of us today. So a couple of things on the big picture. I just want to point out as some highlights here. Today is the International Day of Happiness, as highlighted by the United Nations. This is somewhat coming out of the work out of Bhutan around the Gross National Happiness Project and trying to understand what that means to look at gross national happiness instead of gross domestic product. It's also about not only having the vision that we're going to have here together, but using that vision to inform the actions of others. So the video that we're creating literally right now, and the videos we'll create tonight, will be seen by thousands of people all over the world. Not just here in the US, but in Australia, in Europe, in Asia, the Far East, the Mideast, and it's really just an amazing thing to have so many different organizations engaged around the world. The 4 project goals I'm actually going to read so I don't screw up, just to get clarity around this stuff. The first goal is to release the individual well-being indicators. So essentially to work through all the research that's out there and all the inputs from all different events like this throughout the year and decide on what are the best indicators that we can use to help indicate our overall well-being and happiness. And then also on that same day to release the application that I was talking about earlier. The really big goal that I think is important here is what we do out when we hit out 2 years from today, on March 20th, 2015, when we have over 100,000 people who have taken the survey and continue to share their well-being indicators and sharing that data, which again will help the algorithms grow smarter over time. And also by that same time to have used the Happathon applications to have people increase their personal, family, community, business, region, and or national well-being by 5%. So I mean, look, the ultimate end goal here while talking together and creating an action plan is great, but ultimately the goal here is to impact people's lives. And that's the sort of opportunity that lays before us every day here in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. I know many of you are engaged in startups yourselves or other important community projects. This is a part of your DNA, and I'm glad you're able to share a part of it and contribute it to our DNA here on the Happathon project. In addition to that, I already told you need to take the survey and participate, and it's all at happathon.com. That tags for today, Happathon or Happathon SF, if you want to be more specific, but Happathon's fine. There's I think we're the only event right now in this time zone, so everything going on now is going to be ours, and we can stay on top of it. And of course, you can also follow at Happathon. So we'll share these URLs in a follow-up email. So everyone is registered via Eventbrite. We'll share these URLs and some others, as well as some notes and links to the photos and everything after the event. There is a longer 20-minute video. Seriously, if you have time to look at it, I'd recommend you take a look through. It's actually John Havens explaining the entire project, how it came to be, and how he came to this work, which really started out of a few articles he started writing for Mashable. And those articles ultimately became a work of passion for him that led him to connect with so many people like John and others around the world who were already doing this work. And you'll also find those all from happathon.com. Thanks very much. Without further ado, Peter Hirschberg, my former partner at the Conversation Group, and so much more. I don't even know how to introduce you. He's the original madman. That's probably the best way to do that. So thank you so very much, Peter, for joining us.
Well, thanks, Chris. This is a really cool project at a really important time, because I think what's really going on here is we're defining a lot of the architecture and values that this next phase of the Internet's going to have, in the sense that we don't build technology value free. The fact that the Internet was built as something that was open and distributed wasn't an accident. It was conceived of and designed that way. People had values they imbued in it, and that's what we believe in today. And in fact, you can see kind of these values of openness fighting the values of closedness in the way that, say, China or Russia try to interpret the Internet. So here we enter this world of big data, where all of society is quantified, and we store all of this information. And the framing we have for it is really the only framing we can have, which is, since the 1970s, corporations put stuff in databases, and they used it to their advantage. And Silicon Valley is completely guilty of this, or a partner to it, because our most successful companies like Facebook and Google, this is what they do. And the question is, like, is there another way of framing it and using this stuff? And it turns out that if you're looking at how do we use all of this stuff to maximize delight or societal value or individual value, you start coming up with different structures of value and of privacy and of what we're going to create. And what's, I think, interesting about this project is it's leaning in there and saying something's possible here. So what I want to talk about now are some really practical things that I've been involved in and I've seen going around the world that are examples of this. I got into this largely because right when San Francisco was opening up its data, so San Francisco was one of the first cities to create open public data. We opened up crime data sets, transportation data sets, health data sets. And right around the time that that happened, I was co-founder of Gray Area Foundation for the Arts, and we found ourselves kind of with Code for America in the middle of first visualizing this and then building applications around it, kind of crowdsourcing citizen hackathons in this space. And then I later worked with the United Nations on a project called Global Pulse, and I'm now working with a number of cities around the world in how we do this. So here's some interesting examples. One of the most interesting ones comes from San Francisco. So we opened up a bunch of data, and then the question is anyone going to use it? And you can find out whether they're using it or not by looking at how many API calls there are, who's doing well with it. There's a guy in the public health department here named Rajiv Bhatia, and he decided he wanted to use the data that San Francisco opened up to make this a healthier, happier city. So he created the Sustainable Communities Index, and he basically started using all this data to figure out how can we improve things. So he took transportation and accident data, and he found those intersections that were unsafe, and he declared them unhealthy. And then he started working with the transportation department to change how lights were done, how rules were done to manage for fewer fatalities. He looks at air pollution and then starts managing for, well, how can we change patterns for that? He looks at landlord and housing violations and says, well, that's not very happy or healthy. And he starts using city policy to bring about change. Now, you can imagine at first people didn't like this. It was, he was a data guy in the health department. You're not supposed to be an activist to bring about change, but he was a health guy. He's a doctor. He believes in making things better. And this is an example of what happens when you start using data to bring about change. And the Sustainable Communities Index is a really interesting project that is now trying to be spread, but that's an example of using data for change. Another interesting example is a project that John Clippinger is involved in. It turns out, just using effluent cell phone data, we can figure out if you're depressed. So, and this is a project that's being done with returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And the problem is we know there's kind of a high suicide rate, and the traditional ways to find depression is you go to a shrink, we find things out, but it turns out real-time data coming from your cell phone tells you in real time if there's a problem and you can intervene. What kind of data? Well, are you less social? Are you interacting with fewer people? Are you staying in bed longer? I mean, there's just a whole bunch of indicators that just comes out of the 30 sensors from a cell phone that if you had access to them, you can predict this and make lives better. So that's an interesting example of that. We started doing these hackathons in San Francisco, and what this is really about is how you get citizen engagement in building a better city. And what we found is, okay, well, the hackathon is good for something that's going on for a weekend, and you can build an incubator, and you can kind of make it go longer. But it's really about co-creation, and in this case, working with the city in that. I'll give you another example of how we applied this. We took this to Singapore. So one of the questions in Singapore was, would citizens want to get engaged? Because that's a real top-down society, unlike San Francisco and Berkeley, that we've been activists since the get-go. Well, it turns out in Singapore also we had about 250 people show up, work for kind of over several days, build a bunch of prototypes, and a couple of them are getting funded. So here's some examples of things that we got figured out there. We got a lot of private data opened up that you don't normally see. So one of the important distinctions to make here kind of in this world of data is there's public data, like the stuff the city does. There's crowdsourced data. Private data is a big issue because of privacy. And we built a sandbox and put up some rules in Singapore. And we got the carrier to give us 2 million records of carrier data, which is really where everybody is all over town. Now, if you violate the privacy of that, it's bad. But if you actually can use that to figure out where traffic is and how people are behaving, you can do great good. We got that. We got parking data. We got taxi data. It suddenly gave us a snapshot of how people behave in that society. We found that 15% of all taxi rides overlap each other. We began to see the DNA of how to reduce traffic. One of the points here is that to do great good in a society, it turns out you actually do need to aggregate data. That the very same thing that creates privacy concerns creates the big picture that could really improve things. And that's kind of one of the reasons that the economy of this is going to change. It's the reason that we want private data stores isn't just because we want to protect stuff from companies, but you get to do great good when you aggregate things. Quantified self is kind of the basis of a lot of this. There's a hackathon that's about to happen in Singapore, which is based on health. And so one of the things, Singapore is just a really interesting example because they're a small, wealthy city-state, and they can just do things. So they're like a prototype for the rest of us. Singapore Ministry of Health is actually building a system that will aggregate personal health data, quantified health data, genomic data, so that they can have a really good picture of you and start doing really interesting personalized stuff. That's way out ahead of what we would do here, but that's a really interesting example of where we're going, and they're putting in a gamification layer to manage for that. In the event that's coming up in the next couple of weeks, people have been walking around Singapore with blood glucose monitors. A little thing that gets stuck into your body, gets blood glucose in real time. So we have about 100 people who are monitoring that stuff. Then they're also walking around with Fitbits, so we know we can synchronize that and then find out in real time, are they active or not. And then they're taking pictures of their food. So you synchronize those 3 data streams, you get a really interesting picture. So we're kind of doing that, we're getting diabetics data. So we're kind of a series of data streams, and the idea is we're trying to get the restaurant, the supermarket point of sale data, and can we see like which neighborhoods are healthy and how can we manage that? So you can see as you just bring these things together, you can really act on that kind of stuff. And I bring Singapore up because they actually do experiments that go further than things that we might do here. So that's kind of some of the stuff that's going on here in Singapore. The United Nations has a project called Global Pulse, and the idea again is how do we use big data to go anticipate crises? So it turns out that The way that people top up their cell phones can tell us if they're hitting the poverty line. How people move around can be predictive of disease, because if people get sick in a community, you move around this. So all of this stuff comes together. And I'll wrap up by talking about some of the policy implications. At the moment, we're so concerned, I think, about privacy. And corporations are so happy to protect their silos that in a way, the forces of not leveraging big data for common good are exceeding the forces of doing that. So, it's really easy to say, let's keep all of this data private. It's really, let's not expose, let's not let people have access to our health data or to carrier data, because that's a privacy problem. But if we don't contribute all this stuff to a commons, we can't actually solve those problems. Social science has been built on lots of data in the commons. Right now, we have the opportunity to kind of take all this stuff and do great good with it, or use traditional economics. So I think a couple of things have happened. We want to frame it the way that you all will be framing it. How do we use this to maximize both happiness and better cities? And then what we'll also see is technical structures where you get to own your data so you can do many of these great things with it. And we're sitting right at this moment in time. And so governments around the world are doing these things. But what's really interesting, I think, is a lot of this change is being driven by citizens. Governments are opening up data, but that's the supply side, right? There's data, but unless there's the demand side, people doing things with it, both making it valuable for that to do that and bringing about change, it will go nowhere. In San Francisco, like when Ed Lee was the caretaker mayor before he kind of took over, this whole open data thing got sustained by Code for America and GAP and people working on it. And it's going to be people like you around the world pushing this and showing what can be done that will start pushing things in the direction of showing we want more of this stuff, and most importantly, showing how this data can be used to actually lead to happiness. And that's the most amazing thing. I mean, this is what the video talked about, and it's what some of these government things are doing. If we show that that's possible, because we come at this frame from a point of view that the thing you have to do with data is Facebook has it, they can make money on it, you can do a startup like that. And it turns out there's this amazing alternative that will unleash value, both economic value and societal value, that can barely be seen. And this is a project, I think, that can make it be seen. So, thanks.
Peter's been doing this, and just randomness through the friends that I'm connected to, that this is the world that we're in today. And there's so much more going on that is beyond these rooms that we're connected to from here. And I do believe that one of the indicators of general happiness, although there might be some counterindicators in some cases, is our level of connectedness and how many connections we have to bring in, into our world. How many people can we rely on? Our support networks. And of course, as we see the types of words that are flowing across these networks, we can understand to what level these networks are providing support and generating happiness in our lives, versus perhaps for some people some misery and they don't want to be connected anymore. And they want to get disconnected and have their digital sabbatical for 5 years instead of for 5 days on a nice holiday. But beyond that, one of the themes that Peter hit on that I just want to touch on personally is the quantified self side of things. I know a lot of you actually use a Fitbit or a Fuel Band or something similar. And just the power to not only make it visible how much activity or inactivity you have is such an amazing motivator for those of you who haven't seen it. I mean, every day now I'm trying to get my 10,000 steps, right? And if I'm 4,000, I'm really bummed. And I really actually am like, I got to do something more about that and get out. So I've started taking walking meetings where I'll put my headset on and I'll do my phone calls walking around the block. And that seems to help a lot. I also take a lot more stairs. But the whole point is once this data is visible, it starts making us think and behave differently as a result of that. Another side of it was really interesting this past summer. I actually went in the hospital with what I thought was a heart attack, and it wasn't, thankfully. It was sort of a panic attack, exhaustion, no sleep, no food properly, everything else sort of thing. But I couldn't really figure out why, other than the fact that this happened, but my blood pressure had shot up this one day to 255 over 195. Oh, wow. And that's where I ended up going in the hospital and having the ambulance come out and what have you. But later on, I went back and I was looking at my Y-Things data, which is actually a blood pressure cuff, and I looked at my readings. And I started noticing, like, hey, everything was kind of fine until about early, mid-June, and then it started going up, and then it really spiked at the end of August, and that's early, mid-August, which is where I had that event. And I started thinking, like, what changed And what had changed was that I actually had a hip problem, and I was using Bengay, and I was lathering it on like crazy, just to try to figure out, like, you know, let me sit, let me move around, and what have you. Well, after a little research, I actually found out that the menthol in Bengay and other sorts of topical rubs for aches and pains is a stimulant that can counter certain blood pressure medications, which is the one that I did. So something that my doctors could never have seen, or that I wouldn't have even known, when I was able to see the chart of my blood pressure and connect the dots through my own personal experience and taking personal responsibility for managing my health like this, I was able to make the connection, figure out what really happened, and obviously no longer use Bengay or things like that that are on my hip that would counter my blood pressure medication. So there's a lot of benefits inside of being able to see this data and the quantified self in terms of driving us to behavior change, to getting healthy, to helping us diagnose what's wrong. And of course, there's tremendous stuff going on in the broader movement around Internet of Things and sensors and data and just so much more.
Miss
Please.
Stella,
Stella, hi Stella.
and I'm here out of just pure curiosity about happiness. I read the book by Sean Anker about the happiness, and I have friends who are developing tools around measuring happiness. My question is, for those of us who can't stay the whole time, how do we stay connected with everyone here?
So for everyone here, it's going to be through the Happathon hashtag and through the account, and Happathon SF as well would be the one local group. We still haven't decided if we're actually going to build a full community out of it here versus having it just be part of the ongoing project. If you'd be interested in helping with that, I certainly could use some help to keep the community going. But what we're going to do is...
sign up to the mailing list as well.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a national mailing list.
Yes.
At happathon.com.
Yes, it is.
Yes, and that's where we'll keep in touch. David.
Hey, Chris, so in your ideal world, what do you want to get out of tonight? Like, what would you view tonight as a success if what happened?
So hopefully we're going to have 5 or 6 presentations at the end of the night. That'll be about 3 minutes each, that each group is going to develop together to explain an idea that will help the country of eudaimonia, improve in some of its happiness indicators. So essentially you're going to be breaking apart into small groups, and I've got full instructions I'll read through in a bit, that you'll work on these questions and drive you thinking and to help frame the overall exercise, come up with a creative solution that is without boundaries, and then have somebody present it at the end of the night. And that's essentially the goal, and we'll get each of those on video, and each of those will be an idea that gets sent into the hackers and developers who will take that idea and run with it, maybe build it as is, if it's a really great idea, or take a piece of it and put it into the broader project. Any other points, questions, areas of interest? Yes, Deidre.
As someone who works almost exclusively with Google, is one of the goals of the Happathon overall to get data released? And is that, because Peter talked a lot about that. And so I'm just curious, because they're fairly open. And so I'm curious how that sort of process is going. And
yeah, so I think that it bends towards openness, and that's certainly the ethos of the majority of the participants, and we're also called resource partners, people like John and his organizations and others like it. So definitely leaning towards opening of more government data. But the other thing here is that this is an opt-in society. So privacy and protection of personal information is up to every individual. And part of the Mustard Seed project is to enable people to express how much of their data they can share and with whom. So it gives you tools to actually help kind of determine what's okay to be public, what's okay to be shared with a trusted third party versus what's to not be shared with anyone.
Yep.
So, but the goal is to recruit individuals to opt into this program and to share their data willingly for a common good.
what about the people who have it already, like Google? Is the goal to get them to give some?
Well, I think that the way John's been working with it is that they've tapped into a lot of other partners like that, and through like the Billion Person Project and others, trying to find a lot of other alliance partners to get them to contribute.
Just curious.
MIT, Stanford, United Nations, a whole bunch of other organizations are already part of it. Microsoft as well. So hopefully, with that level of participation, that's going to continue the willingness of people to trust the
Yep.
project and the data security that's been put in place.
And on that data security, everyone, the Happathon app is now available for download. So you can download it from the website as well and participate on an individual basis.
Excellent. Please.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn, and I was curious about the goal and ultimate purpose of the app. Is it to bring more of an awareness of your happiness level, or is it going to, the awareness going to stimulate your happiness? What is the ultimate goal of this?
Well, you know, it's interesting. So it is a movement, right? Not just a instance or a momentary thing. You know, there's parts of the movement that I believe, well, in my mind, so I'm not speaking for John right now, in my mind harkens back to some of the triple bottom line stuff. That we're not just looking at financial success as the only indicator of success, but we're looking at things like looking after the community, the well-being of stakeholders. Now, stakeholders not just meaning shareholders of a corporate entity, but stakeholders being everyone interested in that market and what that company is doing and what we're all doing together. And essentially saying that monetary measurements are not the only ones for success. Trying to shift our thinking around some of the more qualitative elements of happiness and well-being and prosperity. So that, you know, everyone's not looking at like, wow, we're not making as much money as those people living in New York or London or whatever other financial center around the world, but instead can look at their own measures of well-being and say, yeah, but, you know, we find our lives more fulfilled. So literally there's an element of the movement which is about shifting the mindset of individuals around the world and planting that seed. Yeah, money is still important, but it's not the only thing we should be looking at, right? And so beyond that, by making visible what these happiness indicators are, we can take the real-time pulse of society and look at it based on geographical breakdowns and perhaps other measures that we can slice and dice in different ways, demographically or otherwise, to be able to determine who's getting happier and who's actually suffering, and then by bringing visibility to that, to actually encourage people to take actions in certain ways towards that. And of course, more importantly, as we look at the idea of seeding all these different application ideas, is to encourage a hacker ethos around happiness, to get more people to create tools that will help people change their behaviors, that will help people see this information in a new way, and basically also determine that they should be happy because they're doing so well in all these things. But underlying that, which is really interesting, is actually drilling it down to a personal level and how to look at some things like how do you define happiness that you'll find in the survey that ultimately will allow the application and the long-term vision for it to be personalized for you, not just an abstract. So there's multiple goals coming out of it in terms of looking at the long-term picture and what we're hoping to accomplish together.
Okay.
Anything else? Any other ideas? Anything we missed? Yes, in the back.
Jim, just a quick question. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but you mentioned that you're trying to get some tools out of the data that you collect. Do you have any vision, or are there any plans to create certain specific tools out of that?
Yeah, next year.
Yeah, so a year from today, using the happiness indicators and from the Bhutan project, and I'll share some of those with you here in a moment, as well as some of the indicators that we crowdsourced together over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, to actually have an application that will be released 1 year from today that will show these happiness indicators and integrate with your personal happiness as well.
Redefine
So,
the GDP.
Yep. All right. So, the country of eudaimonia needs your help. While they have some metrics that are optimized for the well-being of their citizens, there are many areas that could still be improved. What this means is that they're flourishing or doing well with some of the economic and other aspects of their lives, but need help finding balance all around for the greatest benefit of their citizens. So you are all going to help brainstorm ideas to help them. Statistics for eudaimonia that are provided in this game mirror the types of metrics used by Bhutan for their gross national happiness index and many other countries around the world. It's important for you all to recognize that happiness indicators are not based on mood or fluffy metrics, but are quantitative measures helping to reshape our world. This is why it's so powerful to map your own well-being or happiness to a personal happiness indicator. You can start to understand your holistic value in the context of where the world is moving, which is away from the GDP. It's also very cool to note that the United Nations supports Bhutan's work, and is also trying to help all their member countries discover how they can work with their countries on these types of happiness metrics to help their citizens find their well-being. So let's take a look at some of those metrics. Time use, sleeping versus walking and waking hours, level of education, culture, environment diversity, the governance and freedom and institutional trust, living standards, income, housing, food security, etc., community vitality, social support, networks, kinship density, health, physical health, and psychological well-being. This example shows all the areas that Bhutan's gross national happiness focuses on. So this really kind of lays the foundation for why quantified self and Internet of Things can kind of fit into this. The quantified self movement is already transforming millions of lives, as we've discussed previously. Here are some other quick examples. This is the OECD Better Life Index, charting different countries against one another. And getting more specific, the idea is to get people on a scale of 1 to 10 here, relative to their level of life satisfaction, if they are satisfied with their life, if they find their lives worthwhile, if they were happy yesterday, if they were anxious yesterday. So using some of these other indicators and looking at the spread, and of course as we look at the spread relative to high levels versus low levels, we want to improve the positive feelings towards general happiness. The OECD Better Life Index that measures the happiness indicators for multiple countries and statistics. This one is taken from the United Kingdom, where Prime Minister Cameron is using these types of quantitative and qualitative measures to help improve citizens' well-being, and an entire page on Wikipedia, which I don't have because you all seen pages on Wikipedia, so we're skipping that one. So now check out the happiness indicator metrics for eudaimonia. And these are also going to be provided on your worksheets at each table so you can see it. So we're going to give these out to you in a few minutes when we get underway. What you see here is a more holistic portrait of this country than just looking at their gross domestic product. You can see areas where they have an abundance of one metric, like a high health satisfaction, which is 80% self-reported satisfaction with it, and a lower abundance of a different metric, like housing, which is 35% of average income. So one major advantage of looking at more holistic portrait of value is seeing how you can leverage your country or a person's strengths to help the areas they need to optimize. Using real-time data, you can also see how improvements, when provided to a country, can immediately start helping individuals, communities, or even an entire population. So in just a minute, we're going to break into groups of 6 to 8, where we're going to get a chance to work together brainstorming new ideas. And what I'd like you all to do is kind of also realize that we have the law of 2 feet going here, right? So if you get into a group and you find that the idea that they're working on or that's kind of gelling together isn't one you want to contribute to, you're more than free to move to another group, right? We want to be able to keep it flexible and make sure that you're ultimately contributing your most value that you possibly can. So once you break into the small groups, you're going to introduce yourselves to each other quickly, giving each other your names. Then you're going to decide on and write the names down of those who will take on the different roles. And that's laid out on the worksheet relative to who's going to be presenting, who's going to be taking notes, maybe even who's going to be designing to put together a little graphic or something or other that you might want to show. We've got some whiteboards, we've got pens and markers, as well as some paper that you'll be able to use if you don't have your own. So what you're going to review together is going to be reviewing these eudaimonia's gross national happiness indicators and come to a consensus on one of these, not all of them, that you will work on together and that you will focus on how you can improve well-being in this region in eudaimonia. Next, you're going to brainstorm ideas for solutions to help them improve in that one indicator you decided to focus on together. And of course, you can use other data to focus on solving that problem, but the idea is really to pick the one that you're going to pull the lever on and change and help improve. And then what you're going to do is work together to refine those ideas based on the answers to the following questions. And this is where we get into the meat of the exercise. What is the problem your idea seeks to address? Right? So there's an underlying problem with one of those indicators that you're going to determine together. Number 2, how will the idea you've generated address this problem? And 3, how will you know when your idea is successful? Then essentially after that, what's going to happen is that you're going to have a few minutes when I call time to work together on the presentation back to the group of sharing your idea. And I'll give you a few minutes notice on that, and then you'll have a few minutes to put it back together. And then we'll make a call, and everyone will come up, one person from each group make a presentation up here that we'll capture on video, and then we'll vote on it as a group to pick the one idea that we really want to say, this was the best idea that came from the night. So, in summary, and in making it very simple, what I'm going to ask you to do is break into groups. I want to keep it to about 5 to 6 people a group because that's about the ideal number. We have a workspace area over here with the whiteboard. We have another one we'll put up here. We'll move these couches, these chairs around with another whiteboard. We've got some paper as well, and I think there's one more whiteboard in the back. We're going to give you the worksheets. The worksheets are pretty straightforward relative to what to do. The main thing is to pick an economic indicator of the gross national happiness. Sorry, wrong way. Wrong way. Am I going the wrong way? There we go. That you're going to focus on and solve, and to brainstorm how are you going to solve it. This can be a marketing campaign, or an app, or something similar. So a couple of examples here that we're talking about. So a sample app idea might be that citizens of Eudaimonia will create wearable sensor clothing for employees to analyze when they're happiest at work. Fabric will change colors based on mood, so people can be more sensitive to their colleagues when they're down and increase their productivity. So a sample marketing campaign is the thank you campaign. Citizens of Eudaimonia are assigned 25 people in one day. They try to thank for something they've done. Each person who is thanked is asked to wear a Fitbit or biometric sensor that will show their increased positive heart rate. The improvement in health over the course of 1 month will be mapped, as well as a correlation of data around health insurance rates being lower. Local employers will be able to charge less for insurance and have more money to hire more employees. So does that make a little more sense now relative to what we're going to be doing and sorts of ideas that we're looking for? Good, because this is the first time we've all done this. So we're in this together as a trial, right? And I'll be around to answer any questions or more that you have as you go. And right now, if there's, well actually before we break, any other big questions? Does it make sense generally what we're being asked to do? Brainstorm an idea together in small groups. Help Eudaimonia get better and happier and more prosperous. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So 1, 2, 3, break!